Welcome back. If you are here, you've either recently undergone a pec tendon injury, possibly looking at getting set up for surgery and wondering how it's going to be, or you're just curious what my recovery's been. I am now 8 weeks post pec rupture with a tendon allograft augmentation, meaning a cadaver tendon augmentation to finalize and solidify the repair. So I'm 8 weeks out, and really the first thing I'll do is I'll just jump right into what the range of motion and everything looks like. My injury is on the left side, and here my right side, full range. My left, I'm now probably operating about like 150, 160. I'll give you a reference here. So it's directly at my ear. This is 150 or so, and then turn kind of looks like that. As you can see, as I come up, once I get kind of like here, maybe 110, 120 degrees, my body starts looking for ways to adapt and compensate. And of course we don't want that. Now, I'm not trying to do so much active motion like this, because what's happening is if this is the glenoid or the socket that the arm sits in, and this is the humeral head, as you raise your arm up, the rotator cuff pulls it down. Well, without a strong rotator cuff, I'm unable to do that. Well, the rotator cuff isn't as strong as it needs to be because it hasn't been really working as well as it needs to be for the last 2 months. Not to mention, I have motion in the front, the chest, which is tightening down and not even allowing that beautiful motion to occur. My goal right now is first and foremost is to get that range of motion where I have the ability to raise my arm up. I'm trying to do that over the next 4 to 6 weeks. I think another 4 to 6 weeks, I'm gonna be able to have the full range of motion without adaptations or compensations. What I'm looking at doing specifically is if I'm gonna try to do a 30,000 foot view out and then kind of zoom in. First thing I need to think about as a therapist is the VIF. VIF is an acronym that we use for volume, intensity, and frequency. Right now, my total intensity can't be that high because I'm recovering. My volume is slowly increasing, but the main factor I'm focusing on here is the frequency. It's a triangle, so you can't put all of them up at the same time. You have to manipulate. And right now, what I'm doing is the frequency because I'm doing a little bit of intensity and I'm trying to be frequent. I'm doing it 3 times a week. Also being mindful of the total volume because it is increasing. Volume being if I'm raising my arm up and I'm doing 2 sets of, let's say 10, well, the next session, if I'm doing 3 sets of 10, that's a big increase. And so I'm being mindful of all that together. That's one factor. Another factor I'm looking at is the internal and external load. The volume is the external load. That's how much I'm doing altogether. The internal load is how I feel internally. Do I have any pain, discomfort? Am I getting enough sleep? All the other soft things that actually matter with recovery. Nutrition, water, all of those things. So because I'm getting compensations, raising my arm up, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the range of motion first in a supine position, which means I'm laying on my back. That's gonna serve one of 2 things. Number one, what that allows me to do is I get to avoid gravity. Because as I raise my arm up, gravity is constantly pulling my arm down, which makes it much heavier. If you've ever held, let's say, a cup of water here versus out here, it's harder the further away it is. Well, the same goes true with an arm. We control that with the back of the arm and really the rotator cuff. Like I mentioned earlier, mine isn't really strong, so I'm trying to get that stronger. And without having a strong rotator cuff, it's not dropping the humeral head like it needs to, which leads to it staying up and elevated, creating impingement. What I don't want to do is get a secondary issue because I didn't mindfully pay attention to this one. That secondary issue for most is going to be impingement. Either some tendon irritation, tendinopathy, maybe the biceps tendon, the rotator cuff, what have you. It can be a million things. But I want to avoid that. How I'm going to do that? I'm going to do the exercises building my range of motion laying down. That's number one. Number two, what I'm going to do is also focus on the rotator cuff. Now, because we're naturally stronger here in the front than the back, the muscle and everything being so tight, it's going to pull me forward. I need to really work on opening that up to stretch this out, but more importantly, to strengthen up the back of the rotator cuff. The muscle I'm mainly focused here is the infraspinatus. That's one of the 4 rotator cuff muscles. I want to start training this muscle of what it needs to in all the planes it needs to work. Now, I'm going to do it first in a protected manner, and then I'm going to get away from being protected and be more realistic of what life demands. So what I'm going to do is do some external rotation work, which is your fancy banded exercises or dumbbells and such, but I first want to be supported. As much support as I can give myself so I can target and emphasize the area of the muscle that I need most. A couple exercises I'm doing is just laying down. My therapist, which happens to be my wife, has just manually been doing some resistance here. My arm is completely supported. As you can imagine, I'm laying down like this, and she's just giving me a little bit of manual resistance. Now I'm starting to also progress that to where I'm actively moving. So my arm is here, is supported. Let's say I'm using like a desk or the back of a chair, and I'm starting to do this with just the weight of my arm. and I slowly progressed to doing it with a dumbbell and such, or a band. Now I'm able to hold my arm up like this and start moving in various planes. That's the difference of going from supported to unsupported. Supported would be where I want to spend the majority of my time, because I'm not gonna compromise other areas of the rotator cuff. In this case, generally the supraspinatus, which is what most people have, the part when they get impingement and get some of that irritation. So I want to protect that from occurring. Other things that I'm doing is horizontal abduction. So while laying down, I'm gonna use my other arm so I don't irritate this one. As I'm laying down on my back, I'm raising my arm up like this. What I'm also doing is I'm having a band from the opposite end that is constantly pulling me in, and I'm trying to resist that as I'm going out at the same time. That allows me to work on the back side of the rotator cuff in an unsupported fashion dynamically. That is going to allow me to get closer to be able to lift my arm up like this and maybe grab something out of the cupboard, or do some of those other things that I need to do day in and day out that actually matter for my day-to-day life. And that is the exercise I'm using to kind of bridge that gap of getting me there. A couple other things I'm doing, I'm trying to just slowly reincorporate things in my life. Just naturally letting my arms swing a little bit more if I'm out walking, and just slowly allowing more and more motion. Overall, I don't really have any pain. There's a couple times I kind of forget about it actually, and I kind of put my arm in a position because you just instinctively do it and you're like constantly reminded. I don't really have any pain. I haven't taken any pain medications or anything in actually 7 weeks now. I haven't taken anything. Really haven't had any issues, and it's been great. Not sleeping with a sling. Occasionally I'll wake up sleeping because I try to put my arm in a position. I naturally like to sleep like this, and sometimes I'll wake up trying to do that and I'm reminded very quickly that, hey, it doesn't want to go that way. So I've been trying to circumlocute everything in the pec, meaning not targeting this directly. I'm trying to focus on everything around it, right? That also helps support it with co-contractions and such. Now I'm slowly, after 8 weeks, starting to incorporate the pecs. And one of the next things I'm going to do over the next 4 weeks outside, 4 to 6 weeks outside of actually continuing to focus on the range of motion, is just slowly incorporating them in first an isometric fashion, meaning I'm going to start working on them. 2, I'm going to start working those banded exercises coming inward. Quick note, most people think that internal rotation exercise with a band that you see a lot of baseball players and people use for the rotator cuff is for the rotator cuff. Not necessarily. It's actually for the pec. The pec is the strongest internal rotator. It really got popular from that because what we know is the subscap, which is one of the muscles of the rotator cuff that does internal rotation. You have a harder time doing that if that is torn. But we also know that that's not the main internal rotator. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm doing some isometrics. I'm actually loading it first by putting weight on it. So sometimes it's even just sitting here like this and leaning forward, putting weight through it. I've done some where I have my arms supported on various places and I'm trying to put a little bit of weight through that, or even up against the wall and trying to put a little bit of weight through it that way. That's isometric, or just holding a band like this and just walking with it this way, that the band is that way and it's pulling me. We're going to slowly start adding some internal rotation, some isotonics or some active movement in there, and then I'm going to slowly progress and just continuously make that a little bit harder and harder until I start getting back to those things. One of the ones I'll avoid for a little bit will be like a chest press. We want to avoid really going behind the plane of the shoulder, where bringing our elbow behind us. I want to avoid that really for 12 weeks minimum. I'll slowly, progressively get stronger in that plane and continue to progress. Overall, I think I'm going to be able to get that full range within the 12 to 14 week time frame. So I'm thinking another 4 to 6 weeks from now. I'm not going to be done with therapy. I'm really just entering a new phase. And that phase is going to be more of that return to sport, more of the rebuild the strength, the endurance and all that, before I get to the third phase, which is really the fun phase that I like to think of, is where you push things. You push it to the same way that I would want to push as if I was just actively trying to get in shape or get really strong and things like that. So I figured I'd give you a quick update. I probably won't do another update for probably another month or so, just because it kind of gets really boring, if you will. As far as the work I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be putting in more, making a little bit of changes, but overall it's going to be really much the same. And this is what therapy looks like. Every day doesn't need to be changing what you're doing, but I'm seeing a little bit of progress. Hopefully you are too if you've been following along. And it's one of those things that it's been humbling along the journey, but it's also been fascinating and eye-opening to see how resilient the body really is and just how well you can recover if you follow the script. And remember the script, peace and love, and I'm following it to a T.